Welcome, Hare Krishna. We have a variegated program tonight. I think I'll start with some questions asked from the preceding days that we haven't finished. And then we'll take a look at one or two of Krishna's qualities from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar Devotion. And we'll discuss also a bit of how people usually try to psychologically cope materially with treacherous circumstances, choppy seas, rough seas. Om Jnanatirmarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. First we have a question from Krishnananda Das of Wellington. He says, "We are seeing in the world today a great test of political leadership to protect the citizens from the dangerous coronavirus and steer countries away from chaos and anarchy. In the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, we see saintly King Anga being disappointed with his demoniac son Vena, renounce the kingdom to enter the forest. Afterwards, chaos reigned until Lord Prithu emerged and order was restored. How can we understand the decision of King Anga to renounce the kingdom and enter the forest at that time, knowing that chaos in society would likely be the result?" So let's begin with the initial premise of this question, that there's a great test of political leadership in the world. In other words, the leaders have to protect the citizens from the dangerous coronavirus and steer their countries away from chaos and anarchy. Consider things another way. Perhaps such unqualified leaders are actually causing chaos. Have you heard from any political leaders about the need to shut down factory farming, where huge numbers of animals are slaughtered like in a concentration camp? Have you heard from any government leaders about the need to uplift their people beyond bodyism, the body conception of life? Do you remember the program of Maharaj Gaya stated in the Fifth Canto? We spoke about this maybe 3 weeks ago. So I think there's no harm in repeating. Maharaj Gaya had a fivefold program. Fourfold, excuse me. He's demonstrating what a real leader does in order to actually minimize anarchy and chaos. The real leader has qualities that do that. So number one, Maharaj Gaya demonstrated poshana, protection for the citizens, so that their personal property would not be disturbed. And he also saw that there was sufficient food to feed all the people. The UN Organization for Food and Agriculture has pointed out that there can be an ensuing, impending food crisis in some parts of the world. Another activity of Maharaj Gaya was prinana, distributing gifts. This was ongoing, not simply a little something put in their bank account to get them through the next couple of months. A third characteristic of Maharaj Gaya is upalalana, sweet words at meetings. But you see, these sweet words were potent enough to actually satisfy all the citizens, not just appeal to one section of the population or divide and conquer, turn one section of the population against another. And number four, anushasana, instructions. Instructions for what? How to be first-class citizens. First class doesn't mean economically, it means in terms of character and behavior. How is it that he could do all this? First of all, he had personal qualities due to his own lifestyle. Number one, he's a householder who strictly followed all the rules and regulations of householder life. And number two, as a king, he gave the citizens all facilities. He made sure that they had all arrangements for becoming spiritually advanced. As a devotee, he was always ready to give respect to other devotees and eager to engage in bhakti yoga, the devotional service of Krishna. Therefore, add all this up and you can understand that Gaya was free from the bodily conception of life. He was full in spiritual realization, and therefore he was always jubilant. There's no question of material happiness and material distress swaying him. And even though he had all these extraordinary qualities, he was not proud, nor was he eager for name and fame in being in charge. So Srimad Bhagavatam is letting us know the real standard for being a chief executive, how to really help the people in all ways. So therefore my question to the question asked is, are you sure the political leadership today is anywhere near protecting people from chaos and anarchy, or are they causing chaos and anarchy by neglecting the prime purpose in life? And therefore what you get is a temporary semblance of stability, but boom and bust is always there. In the developed countries, And in the developing countries, there can be all kinds of ongoing disasters. We'll talk perhaps a bit more about that later. So as far as King Anga, described in the fourth canto, renouncing his kingdom and entering the forest, we can't blame him. The question's implying that he knew that chaos in society would likely be the result of his disappearing into the forest. Actually, the acharyas point out that he was hiding in the same city. It's just that no one could find him. His time had come. He knew. He'd done his best. You can't criticize him for that. At some point in life, he knew he had to retire. And so he saw his circumstances as such that he couldn't go on in his family life and in his role as chief executive. His son was extraordinarily bad. As a little boy, remember, Vena would go to the forest and unnecessarily slay so many deer. And even worse, his playmates, his little playmates, when he would get angry at them, he would just kill them. So, what is Dad supposed to do? He tried to reform his son, but it was impossible. I think the real question here is, why did such a saintly person as Anga get such a son? And also, remember, his wife came from a problematic line, a problematic dynasty. The Bhagavatam points out that her ancestors led right up to death personified. So, why is it, the question should be, that Anga had such a tough wife and such a difficult son? In other words, shouldn't the Lord give his devotee the best of material prosperity and material happiness and nice family life and everything just in order? Krishna's in everyone's heart. He knows what's best for our spiritual advancement. In the case of Maharaj Anga, by having such a family life, it caused him to be detached. Otherwise, who knows? He could have just stayed in his family situation and his royal opulence on and on and on and never renounce. You can understand this further from a question deep in the 10th Canto of Bhagavatam. The question, why is it that it seems devotees of demigods like Shiva have some kind of at least temporary power and opulence, whereas devotees of Krishna can seem to be in materially difficult circumstances? And the famous answer by Krishna, Yashaham Nigranami Harisye Tadjanam Shanai. In special cases, not all the time, but in special cases with special devotees, I give them my special mercy when I see that they're more attached than they should be. What is that special mercy? As Hari, I take everything away. So we may hear that with fear. Hari takes everything away. But we have to remember the other half. Hari takes all the impediments away to pure bhakti and gives ecstatic love of Krishna. Especially when Hari comes as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is Radha Krishna combined. So Anga was doing the best thing. And the acharyas point out that he felt great public shame having such a son. It was unbearable. So he took all that distress, disappointment, exasperation, desperation, and just used it as motivation to renounce. And he left in the middle of the night. He left his palace, his wife, his son, everything in the middle of the night and disappeared. The citizens looked everywhere for him. But as Bhagavatam very eloquently points out, gives the example, like an inexperienced yogi searching for the super soul and who can't find the super soul. Similarly, although the people looked everywhere, they couldn't find Maharaj Anga. And as I said, bit of a detail, footnote, he was evidently in the same city. He hadn't headed out to the wilderness, but he was just hidden. But you say, shouldn't he have stuck around to protect the people from chaos? There's a time for everything. He's got to take care of himself. And that time came when he did the best thing by walking away. We're not the supreme controllers. Otherwise, you could start asking, why does Krishna disappear from ordinary vision? Why do his great devotees like Srila Prabhupada leave our physical presence? Things come in waves. As Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, Sakalinaha Mahata Yoga Nashta Param Tapa. I spoke this Bhagavad Gita before, but due to the passage of time, the genuine meaning of what I said became lost. And therefore I have to speak it again. This is the way the material world is. Even amongst the demigods, there are upsets. What to speak of where we are. These distresses can motivate some people to take more shelter of their spiritual life. For others, though, they may just become angry. So Maharaj Anga did what he was supposed to do. He had put in his time, and according to Vedic injunction, Pancha Sordvam Vanam Vrijet. At the age of 50, after 25 years of family life, the husband can prepare for leaving vanaprastha and then sannyas. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada explains that if your spouse at home is no impediment to devotional service, then actually there's no need to leave home. In Srila Prabhupada's own example, he felt that his family life was an impediment. He felt that his family was ritualistically a nice Hindu family, but no Vaishnava depth to his satisfaction. And his wife would not assist in his beloved attempts for outreach. She wouldn't give up drinking tea. She told him when he asked her, "Look, this has gone too far. It's either the tea or me." And she said, "I'll take the tea." She may not have known how deeply penetrating were those words. But the final straw was when she took his divine Srimad Bhagavatam. She took it to the market and exchanged it for some tea biscuits. That was the last straw. So, in quoting that famous verse, Yasyaham Nigranami Hadisye Tadam Shanai, whenever I see a special devotee who seems to be too attached to his circumstances, and or Krishna doesn't want something else from the devotee, he says, I give my special mercy. I take everything away. Oh, it sounds scary. But remember, at the time of death, everything is taken away. And Krishna, when taking away from a special devotee, rewards that devotee with ecstatic love for him. So this material world is a difficult place. We tend to forget that. Look what happened to Parikshit Maharaj. Why not question that? I remember thinking during the departure year of Srila Prabhupada, 1977, I actually was praying and hoping intensely he'll go on to finish the Bhagavatam so we at the BBT could continue our 24/7 marathon to keep up with him. We were on the 10th Canto, first part of the 10th Canto. And after Srila Prabhupada's departure, there certainly was upheaval. In fact, he writes in one purport in the 4th Canto that what can you expect after the departure of an empowered special devotee? You have to expect disruption. Otherwise, you're being impersonal. Due to that personal presence, personal physical presence, naturally there's extraordinary benefit. And when that extraordinary presence withdraws from everyday vision, naturally there are going to be ramifications. This is all part of personalism. and the sincere devotees try to stabilize the ship in such a situation. So I always thought, as a young devotee, that was 43 years ago or so, oh, if Srila Prabhupada would stay a little longer. And of course every devotee was longing for that. At the same time, Krishna has his plans. He moves his devotee around. Obviously, Krishna thought that Srila Prabhupada had given enough. Even devotees during his year of departure said to him, "How can you go? You said you were going to give us the whole Bhagavatam." And Srila Prabhupada's response was, "What I've given is enough." As far as the 10th Canto, he had already given the famous Krishna book, a summary of the 10th Canto, his favorite book. So there's a timetable for everything. Otherwise, you could say, well, why did Krishna withdraw his manifestation to the ordinary vision of this world? Why did he withdraw that? And then you have the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, such an upheaval. All this disruption and upheaval can motivate a sincere person to realize this world is not a very nice place. I shouldn't be so attached. Jiva Goswami explains about the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, Mokshala Leela, that the external appearance of their departure seems so tragic to ordinary vision. And those who view it in that way get a sense of, what's the point of this world if even such glorious personalities underwent that? So the Mokshala Leela helps you to devalue the worth of the material world. It's Krishna's mercy. Of course, the members of the Yadu dynasty were just using that Mokshala Leela as like a portal to go back to where they came. Expansions of them went back to the heavenly planets. The original personalities went back to Vaikuntha. And then, of course, there's the accompaniment of Krishna, going with Krishna to the next universe where he would have his Leela. So we need to have spiritual vision, or otherwise we won't understand anything of this. Anga, Yadu dynasty, Srila Prabhupada. We'll even not be able to understand what our own life has to pass through. When I think about the departure of my god brothers in the past, doesn't Krishna know how much value they could have added if they were allowed to stay in this world longer? His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and Gunagrahi Maharaj and on and on and on. This goes. Yamuna Devi Dasi. So many others that I'm not mentioning, unfortunately. You could always say, Krishna, what are you doing? We could be benefiting so much from their association, their experience, their wisdom. We need all the help we can get. Look at the situation of the world now. And it's true that for the disciples, the departure of their spiritual master is a difficult time. But because Krishna is in everyone's heart, as Chaitya Guru, gradually things stabilize. There'll always be some, whether disciples of Srila Prabhupada or disciples of his disciples, who become weak, bewildered, and get lost in the fog. Whatever service they did, of course, is their eternal credit. They'll never lose it. This world is a challenging place. So Anga did what he was supposed to do. Now, there was an argument about appointing his son Vena. The ministers of Anga didn't agree, but others wanted to put him in charge. This reminds me of after Prabhupada's departure, there were disagreements. One has to expect that, because during his presence there were disagreements, because the Hare Krishnas are so full of variety, in case you haven't noticed. So many distinct personalities and distinct visions. Somehow Srila Prabhupada kept everything balanced. And then he departed and left everything in our hands. And yes, there was some inevitable confusion and bewilderment. Everyone was so young, in their 20s. I was, 27 years old? I had just turned 27. So during the time of Anga, that is right after his exodus, there was disruption, and that's how life in the material world is. It prods us to get out. We can't be comfortable here. That's why Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Abhava Bhuvana Loka Punarvachuna Arjuna. Even amongst the demigods, there are problems. What to speak of where we are. So how is it that we respond to those problems? We have another question here from Chandidas. What opportunities for expanding Krishna consciousness does this pandemic provide? Will the suffering make people more inclined to take up bhakti, or will the immediate struggle for survival take up all people's attention, leaving no room for Krishna? It can go either way, depending on the good fortune of the person and also if they have contact with a devotee. In other words, it's not automatic that distress produces bhakti. No way. No material circumstances produce bhakti. It's not automatic that distress even makes one more open automatically to bhakti. Sometimes in distress, as the question points out, people may become spiritually curious, and sometimes they may become just caught up in survival and even become angry How can this happen? Hmm. I'll always remember a photo I saw decades ago from Chile. There was an earthquake in Chile which caused havoc. And I saw a photo of a farmer shaking his fist toward the sky, cursing God. How could you do this to us? And you can hear from philosophers since time immemorial, East and West, the so-called problem of evil. If there's a God, how could this happen? How could that happen? Depending on the good fortune of the person, in other words, they're having some kind of spiritual inclinations prior, or they come in contact with a devotee, or simply Lord Chaitanya intervenes, then they can use material distress as a prod to get their life spiritually together. But it's not automatic that that happens. Otherwise, there's so much distress in this world, you should see billions of devotees. I remember from Nectar Devotion, Srila Prabhupada commenting that without a background of punya, pious activities, some kind of favorable mentality, when there's distress, someone can just become, he said, a drug addict or a communist. Godless communist, atheistic. It's the association of devotees that makes all the difference. We may, Wednesday and Friday, talk about King Chitraketu in the Sixth Canto. There was an example of someone who had a massive distress, and then Angira Rishi, the sadhu, returned to instruct him, accompanied by Narada Muni. Purposeful timing by the two. There's also something in the Ninth Canto, I believe, called Crematorium Renunciation, Smashana Vairagya. Upon the extinction of Hiranyaksha, the brother of Hiranyakashipu, upon his termination by Lord Varahadev, his relatives were naturally lamenting. And they received instruction from Yamaraj in the guise of a young boy. People like hearing witty and intelligent things from a little child. They don't take offense. So they received such Divya Gyan, divine knowledge, Atma Tattva, knowledge of the self. But then they forgot it. That's why the term crematorium renunciation, smashana vairagya. Upon the death of a near and dear one, people take the body to the crematorium after the funeral, or they take it to the cemetery to bury. And often in whispered tones, they're saying things like, oh, life is just a dream. You can't depend on anything. Here today, gone tomorrow. They start reflecting deeply about the temporariness of existence. This is while they're at the crematorium or in the cemetery. But then they depart, and that's that. You see, a crucial part of the external energy is forgetfulness. By engaging in material activities, you become dull. So you may have had your lucid moments. Oh, life is but a dream. What's the point in working so hard? You can go any moment. But it doesn't last. Let's consider the current situation in the world. I think I spoke briefly a few days ago about how practically no one remembers 100 years ago the so-called Spanish flu that wiped out minimum 50 million persons, and sometimes it's said 100 million. 17 million is the number that died because of World War I, known as the war to end all wars. If the number that died from the so-called Spanish flu was actually, as some say, 100 million, that's more people than died in the combination of World War I and World War II. 60 million people or so are said to have died in World War II. And by the way, 45 million of those 60 million were civilians, not soldiers. Only 15 million or so were soldiers, military personnel. So at the time, 100 years ago, of the so-called Spanish flu, there were about 1.5 billion people in the world, and 1/3 of them were affected by the flu. Not 1/3 died, but 1/3 were affected. Yet, most persons have forgotten it. Sometimes in the media these days, they make some mention of it. But before this current pandemic, completely forgotten. The scholars who specialize in that time say it's amazing how no one remembers it. They theorize perhaps the forgetfulness is because the big event was World War I. But actually, in terms of deaths and destruction, the flu far exceeded what happened in World War I. I know someone's going to ask me, well, why do they call it the Spanish flu and you say so-called Spanish flu? The virus did not originate in Spain. It just came to light in Spain. Most scholars and researchers point out that it started on a farm in Kansas in the good old USA. But because it was during World War I, the news of its havoc was censored in America and in Europe, except for Spain, which was a neutral country, so therefore they weren't censoring their news. They weren't involved in World War I. So they just publicized this virus. And so from that point on, the virus became known as the Spanish flu, when actually it was the American flu. And it's amazing how throughout the world at that time, as the virus appeared in Africa, India, South America, depending on what your perspective was, you call it the flu from whatever country you wanted. So people were saying the Brazilian flu, or this region of the world's blue. It's just like now. Some leaders are trying to get political mileage by saying the Chinese flu. My point is that the havoc caused by that virus has been forgotten. It's just 100 years ago, but everyone remembers World War I to some degree. This is apohanam, forgetfulness. And what does Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita? Mata smritir jnanam apohanam cha. From me comes all knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. We are not independent in our cognitive abilities. By engaging in Krishna's Maya, we become bewildered and covered over. And of course, Krishna is the origin of that external energy. And furthermore, directly as a super soul in our heart, Krishna can help us to forget about him, or he can help us to forget about our material attachments. So don't trust the memory of human beings when it comes to distress. They forget very quickly if they live in some kind of temporary, stable part of the world, which is relatively economically developed, and only lots of cow slaughter and lots of intoxication, lots of illicit sex, but we tend to forget about the karmic havoc caused by nations organized on material principles. So now you have, as I pointed out before, on the one hand, climate change, that's back burner right now. On the other hand, you've got nuclear weaponry, that's definitely back burner right now. And roaring up the middle is the coronavirus. So how are we going to respond? Some people say we're incredibly adept at adapting to any situation. No matter how bad it is, you adapt. You live your life as best you can. People who say that generally have lots of resources. Their material situation is well established. But what about the others? For example, in the USA, it's said that there are actually 2 pandemics in the USA right now. One experienced by those who are well off, and the other experienced by those who were economically struggling severely before the virus hit. They already were in trouble paying their bills, paying their rent, paying food. They're living in cramped quarters. How do they isolate from family members who are sick? They don't go to doctors because they can't afford it, and there's no universal health care in the USA. So when you can do a class analysis of this. We don't want to get Marxist, but you can do a class analysis that if you're situated in a socioeconomic class with resources, then you can kind of ride out the storm of the virus much easier than those who are at the bottom. Now, just taking the USA for example, we don't want to beat up on the USA, but it's a big example. 1% of the population has more assets than the bottom 80% combined. Some years before this current pandemic, the Federal Reserve Bank in the USA did a survey and found out that 40% of the American public, if hit with an unexpected $400 expense, couldn't handle it except by borrowing something or selling something. It's $400. 40% of the population. So you can just visualize now what the coronavirus is doing. It's not simply health mayhem, it's economic mayhem. Perhaps countries that like their nuclear weapons and think the nuclear weapons preserve their freedoms and values, perhaps those countries would do better by investing that same money in a public health system, upgrading the public health system. So one thing the virus is teaching is that everyone's in this together. As long as the virus exists in some part of the world, there are going to be problems. You can't disconnect from the whole world right now without economic havoc. So human beings of all stripes and types have to pull together. But how can you do that when you think you're the body and your body is different from someone else's body? And you want to blame the other body type for your problems. And the more we take shelter of the body and identifying with it, the more bewildered we become. And then why just human beings that are the creatures that should come together? What about the other species of life? What about the animals? They don't count. But remember how 75% of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic, originating from contact between humans and animals. So in that sense, you can call these zoonotic diseases, like the coronavirus, you can call them the animal's revenge. So, what's the new now going to be? The new normal? Will life ever go back to the way it was before? Or are there just going to be restrictions popping up from time to time as the virus recedes and then storms back? And remember with the Spanish flu, there were 3 waves over the course of a year. And the second wave was the most deadly. So we don't know about the present virus. No one knows. Does immunity last in those who already had it? Is there such a thing as immunity from it? Will it fade away in summertime. No one knows what to speak of. Can this virus come back in waves? Could it be large gatherings will become rare? Travel restrictions will remain? The prosperous, unless they've had massive investments that they've lost, will be doing fine. And most people in this world will contemplate what more upheaval is like. This is all about the question, will people be motivated to take more shelter of spiritual life? Try to understand what they can be going through, unless you are very economically well positioned. In fact, you could be on your yacht in the Caribbean or something far away from the pandemic. If you're not super wealthy and if you're not super poor, here's the concern. Loss of control over your routine, loss of a sense of normalcy, loss of what you call freedom, spontaneous face-to-face connections with no worries, with as many persons as you like for as long as you like. And then you want to fight back, so to speak, to regain a sense of autonomy and control. I've seen that. Not around me, because where I stay, there aren't those kind of persons. But in the media, I've seen it. I'm going to become a crossword puzzle champion. I'm going to start a new diet. Or start something new, a hobby. I'm going to really just gorge on Netflix. Do you know any good books, any novels that will take my mind away from thinking? It's our sense of autonomy and control for many persons that is the greatest problem. And that loss of autonomy and control can lead to depression and anger. So you may recall what it was like during the first days of response in your particular country to the virus. You felt like you wanted to resist this new reality. How can I return my life to normalcy? I'm counting the days until the restrictions go away. And for many, they realize they have little control over the forces upending their life. They're starting to understand that this is how people in places like Afghanistan or Syria, Somalia, this is how they live all the time. They realize we've got little control over what's going on around us. Even we have little control over what's threatening our own life. And so psychologists point out, how is it that people who live in places like that, or even persons who live in economically depressed parts of the first world, what's the mentality? It's the assumption that they have no idea how things are going to be tomorrow. And something terrible probably happened yesterday. Therefore, people just live in the moment. And they just make short-term, tentative plans. When the immediate danger recedes, they cultivate moments of joy and happiness, knowing that the curtain will come down any moment. It won't last. They don't have any expectation of normalcy or control to be shattered. Their pains run deep, and also their resilience. Just live moment to moment, no expectations. So this is what life is like right now for a significant percentage of the world's population, even in the first world. So don't be fooled by thinking, well, everyone's just binging on Netflix and everyone's having a good time relaxing from work because everything is shut down. And that's for those who are privileged. It's true that some persons, out of boredom, may think, let me pick up a Bhagavad Gita and read it. And we're trying to contact those persons. Our book distributors in many places of the world are developing techniques for calling on the phone their contacts, all the contacts that they've gathered over decades. Just call them up and say, how are you doing during this chaotic time, tumultuous time? And by the way, we've got some books that can certainly enrich in everyone's life right now, especially. Whether there's happiness or distress, outreach goes on. So those two questions are very interesting. And we'll go deeper, I think, by going over the history of Chichiketu in terms of his son. We'll discuss it from a different angle. I know so many of you know the basic plot, but we're going to point out some dimensions of the situation which you may not have thought about too much before. What about some Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu? We've been talking about the woes of having a material body in the material world, but Krishna's body, as we were discussing in quality number 54, is something else. And he wants that we associate with him in our original spiritual bodies. So Krishna, Rupa Goswami describes, has a body of condensed eternity, knowledge, and bliss. He has a form thoroughly composed of knowledge and bliss, and therefore the quality is known as Satchit Ananda Sandranga, condensed eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Just like you boil milk and it becomes kheer, condensed. No question of any material contamination whatsoever. The spirituality of Krishna's form is so intensely concentrated. So the first subdivision we described last time was Sat. What maintains Krishna's existence. And we discussed how that characteristic of his body, Sat, eternally existing, points out how he pervades all time and space. And we gave examples of Devaki's prayers. Krishna had apparently appeared from her womb. And we talked about, I believe, Mother Yashoda's binding Krishna. She used a soft rope. She didn't want to pain him. She chose to bind him because she had put down the stick, thinking the stick in her hand was too threatening and would cause psychological damage. But how do you get a rope around someone who has no inside or outside, no beginning or end? So these are given as examples by Jiva Goswami of how Krishna has that quality of Satchidananda, Sandrangha, concentrated form of concentrated eternity, knowledge, and bliss. But then there's Chit. The Lord's body is actually self-revealing. He doesn't take knowledge from the outside. His body reveals knowledge. Certainly dull matter can't do that. So how do we see in action that kind of body? We go to the Brahma Vimohana Leela, the bewilderment of Lord Brahma. What's happening is that Brahma, in his bewilderment, couldn't understand the situation. He had dared to try to show off his mystic power in Krishna's Leela. And now he's totally bewildered, like a firefly trying to show its light during the bright sunshine of the day. So the Shastra describes that Brahma felt like snow on a dark night. You don't see the gleam from snow when the night's completely dark. He's thinking, who are these cowherd boys with Krishna? I thought I had stolen them. Now, is one set created by Krishna? Are both sets created by Krishna? Because I hid them, tucked them away on a riverbank somewhere. Or maybe when I look back to see the cowherd boys on the riverbank, and then before I get my head all the way around to see these cowherd boys in Vrindavan, Krishna's moved them quicker than I can turn my head. He's really bewildered. Is one batch created by Maya? What's going on here? He was speculating his head off. So Krishna decided to put him out of his misery. Enough speculation. Watch this. Tavat sarveva sat. Tavat sarve vatsapala Pashyato jasya tatshanat Vyadrishyanta ganatshama Pita kosheya vasasa. Then, while Lord Brahma looked on, all the calves and the boys tending them immediately appeared to have complexions the color of bluish rain clouds and to be dressed in yellow silken garments. You know what was going on. All these cowherd boys and calves turned into Vishnu Murtis, four-handed forms of Vishnu. While Brahma was straining his brain, and his brain is, in terms of cognitive powers, is the biggest in the universe, trying to understand what's going on, trying to understand the immense power of Krishna. What is Krishna doing here? Before he could come to a conclusion, he saw this transformation right in front of his eyes. The cowherd boys and calves turned into four-handed Vishnu forms. So Jiva Goswami wants to make the point that this vision that Brahma saw of the calves and cowherd boys as four-handed Vishnu forms didn't happen because of Brahma. It didn't happen because of any vision he has. They appeared spontaneously by their own power. In other words, disregarding him. Just Krishna decided, let this happen. Never mind what Brahma is trying to see or not trying to see. Never mind what Brahma understands or doesn't understand. I'm doing this. Watch. Now, the associates of Lord Narayan in Vaikuntha also have four arms, but that's what Sarupya, the liberation of Sarupya, is, having the same form as the Lord. But there are some characteristics that are not shared with the associates of the Lord. Two of them, to be precise, the Kaustubha jewel and the tuft of hair on the chest of the Lord, known as Srivats. A little curl of yellow hair on the chest of the Lord. So all these calves and cowherd boys who turned into Vishnu forms, they had the necessary paraphernalia of Vishnu forms. They were not associates of the Lord in Vaikuntha. So that is Chit. In other words, what kind of body are you dealing with here? We've talked about Sat, the eternal existence, capacity of Krishna's form, and now the Chit, all-knowing. What's left is Ananda. And remember, Chit, in this situation, demonstrates the Lord as a self-revealing entity. But by his own capacity, the cowherd boys and calves demonstrated themselves as Vishnu Tattva. And there's no question of these forms being dull matter. Dull matter doesn't have that capability. The last Ananda the Lord's form is called Ananda because all the parts of his body are the object of pure undiluted prema. There's no difference, of course, between Krishna's body and his self. There's no difference between his inside and his outside. Each part of his body can perform the function of all the other parts. So this is demonstrated earlier in the Brahma Vimohana Lila. We'll go around verse 36 of chapter 13 of the 10th Canto. The various stages that Balaram went through under Krishna's supervision as Balaram pieced together what was going on. You remember the situation. For 1 year, no one knew in Vrindavan what Krishna had done. Yet, during this whole year, the cowherd men and older gopis were loving their sons as if they were Krishna. Of course, they were Krishna. Krishna had replaced all the missing cowherd boys and calves with his personal expansions. So they weren't Jiva Tattva, they weren't Shakti Tattva, they were Vishnu Tattva. You see, the older gopis were always thinking, oh, Mother Yashoda is so fortunate. She has Krishna as her son, but if Krishna were my son, I would love him so much. So Krishna gave them a chance. He replaced the missing cowherd boys and calves. And so for 1 year, this extraordinary situation is going on in Vrindavan in which everyone is just attracted even more to these sons and these calves. Because every part of the body of these sons and calves was Krishna. But they didn't know it. And so an impartial observer would see that these elders were loving these sons just like they were Krishna. And the cows were loving their calves just like they were Krishna, because they were Krishna. So that, in other words, there was an overwhelming flood of increased affection that normally is shown just for Krishna. And even Balaram didn't catch it, because Balaram was covered by Krishna's Yoga Maya. In this way you can see Krishna, the original personality of Godhead, is the ultimate. Why didn't Krishna clue Balaram? Clue him in. He was thinking, I don't want Balaram feeling separation from his mates like Sridhama. I don't want to explain the situation to him yet, what Brahma has done and how I've compensated. You might say then, well, what about Krishna? Doesn't he feel separation from his missing friends? But he was there with those missing cowherd boys in his expansion form. As they were where they were. So covered by Yogamaya, no one thought to investigate all this attachment. All this raga is going on as if everyone has Krishna in their home and in their cowshed. What's going on here? No one thought that, not even Balaram. Also, the acharyas point out that Krishna wanted to enable Baladev, Lord Balaram, to take the viewpoint of a devotee and be immersed in the ocean of Krishna's power, his Aishwarya. He wanted Balaram to have that experience. So the verse quoted in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu to make you understand the Ananda nature of Krishna's form, in which every part of his body is composed of pure prema. The verse quoted is Kim etat adbhutamiva vasudeve kilatmani vrajasya satmanas tokeshapurvam prema vardite. What is this wonderful phenomenon? The affection of all the inhabitants of Braj, including me, this is Balaram speaking, toward these boys and calves is increasing as never before. Just like our affection for Lord Krishna, the super soul of all living entities. So there were 4 stages of the Yogamaya influencing, relaxing for Balaram. You're in the first stage now where he's now notice what's going on. These cowherd men and women are loving their sons like they were Krishna. And the cows are loving their calves like they were Krishna, even though the calves have newly born calves. Even though the cows have newly born calves, they're giving their greatest affection to these older calves, who we know, of course, are Krishna. So what's going on here? This is stage number 1. Balaram detects Yogamaya, but he's wondering, whose energy is this? Is it some demigods, some sages, some demoniac witch, Rakshashi? And he discards those reasons. No witch, no Rakshashi can bewilder me. I'm Balaram. Sages wouldn't do such a thing. They have good qualities. Demigods, no, not them. It must be my brother. So step 1, he noticed the surge in affection going on in Vrindavan, as if everyone had Krishna in their home and in their cowshed. Step number 2, he recognizes there's some energy working here. Step number 3, he realizes it's Krishna's energy. And step number 4, Krishna shows him, take a look at this. They're all Vishnu forms. It's wonderful talking about Krishna's body. Satchidananda Sandranga, condensed eternity, knowledge, and bliss. The next quality we may talk about in the coming days is how Krishna's body possesses all mystic powers. All right. It's been a pleasure discussing with you. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.